The raindrops fell like tiny missiles against the pavement as 9-year-old Emma Thompson huddled deeper into her threadbare jacket. The Willowbrook Children's Home had strict curfew rules, but Ms. Patel had sent her to fetch medicine from the pharmacy 6 blocks away. Emma clutched the small paper bag containing cold medicine for the younger children, determined to get back before she got into trouble. As she hurried past the gleaming office buildings of downtown, a strange sound caught her attention. Through the curtain of rain, she spotted a figure slumped against a bench, one hand clutching his chest, briefcase toppled beside him. "Mister, are you okay?" Emma approached cautiously, her small voice barely audible above the downpour. The man's face was ashen, contorted in pain. His expensive suit was soaked through, his normally commanding presence diminished by whatever was afflicting him. "Hospital, ... He gasped, fumbling for his phone which had fallen from his grasp. Without hesitation, Emma picked up the device. Though the orphanage couldn't afford to give children phones, Ms. Patel had taught them emergency procedures. With small, determined fingers, Emma dialed 911. "There's a man having a heart attack," she explained with surprising clarity to the dispatcher. "We're on Maple Street, by the big glass building." While they waited, Emma held her jacket over the stranger's head, ignoring the rain soaking through her own clothes. "What's your name?" she asked, remembering how Ms. Patel always said, talking kept people awake when they were in trouble. "Richard ... double quotes," he managed between labored breaths. "Richard Warren." Emma nodded solemnly. "I'm Emma. Don't worry, the ambulance is coming." She spotted a cafe across the street and made a split-second decision. "I'll be right back," she promised, then dashed through traffic. 2 minutes later, she returned with a cup of water she'd begged from a startled barista. The lady said this might help. Richard Warren, CEO of Warren Enterprises, and notorious for making grown men cower in boardrooms, looked up at this tiny, soaking wet child, offering him water with steady hands. Something in his chest shifted, and it wasn't just the cardiac. Event in progress. When the ambulance finally arrived, Emma refused to leave until the paramedics had loaded Richard inside. "You should come too," one paramedic suggested, noting her drenched state. Emma shook her head. "I need to take medicine back for the other kids." She pointed to the paper bag she'd carefully kept dry. "Ms. Patel is waiting." "What's your full name, kid?" Richard called weakly from the stretcher. "Emma Thompson from Willowbrook Children's Home," she answered, already backing away. "Get better, Mr. Richard." As the ambulance doors closed, Richard Warren, who had built an empire through calculated decisions and emotional detachment, found himself fixated on the image of a small girl standing alone in the rain, who had given everything she had, which wasn't much to help a complete stranger. "Willowbrook," he whispered to himself as the sirens began to wail. In that moment, something fundamental changed in Richard Warren's world. Richard Warren discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice 3 days later. His executive assistant, Naomi Jenkins, waited with the car, clutching a tablet. Filled with urgent business matters requiring his attention, "The board meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow," she informed him as they pulled away from the hospital. "And there's the matter of the Davidson acquisition. They're getting cold feet after news of your ... incident." Richard barely registered her words. "I need you to find information on Willowbrook Children's Home," he interrupted. "Everything, their funding, conditions, staff, and a child named Emma Thompson." Naomi's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly, but she made the note. Without comment, 24 hours later, a comprehensive file appeared on Richard's desk. The contents disturbed him deeply. Willowbrook operated on a shoestring budget, housing 37 children in a facility designed for 20. Emma Thompson had been there. Since age 4, after losing her parents in a car accident, no relatives had claimed her. Her file noted exceptional academic potential but limited opportunities due to funding constraints. "Schedule a meeting with my attorney," Richard told Naomi that afternoon, "and find me the best education consultant in the city." Over the following weeks, as Richard recovered from his heart attack, a series of anonymous donations transformed Willowbrook. New beds, educational materials, a computer lab, and additional staff appeared, Special scholarship fund was established for children showing academic promise, with Emma Thompson as its first recipient. We have an anonymous benefactor, Ms. Patel explained to a wide-eyed Emma. They've arranged for you to attend Riverview Academy starting next month. But why me? Emma asked, clutching the brochure for the prestigious school. Ms. Patel smiled. Someone believes in you, Emma. Sometimes angels appear when we least expect them. Richard Warren, meanwhile, returned to his reputation as the most ruthless CEO. In the business world, if anything, his brush with mortality made him more determined. Warren Enterprises expanded aggressively, absorbing competitors and diversifying into new markets. But twice a year, Richard received a plain manila envelope containing Emma Thompson's school reports and a handwritten assessment from the private education consultant he'd hired to monitor her progress. Subject shows exceptional aptitude in mathematics and problem solving, read one report when Emma was 14. Recommend advanced placement in university track. Richard kept these reports locked in his personal safe. Alongside the only photograph, he allowed himself a newspaper clipping from a regional mathematics competition, showing Emma accepting a first-place trophy, her smile radiant, still playing Fairy Godfather to your street urchin? His ex-wife Victoria remarked during one of their rare interactions, having accidentally glimpsed the photo. A business investment, Richard replied coldly. Talent development for future recruitment. But alone in his penthouse at night, Richard often wondered about the real reason. Perhaps it was gratitude for the small hand that had dialed for help when he lay dying on the sidewalk, or perhaps it was the memory of those steady eyes, unafraid and determined, offering comfort to a stranger while standing in the rain. Whatever the reason, Richard Warren, who trusted no one and believed sentiment was for fools, continued his silent guardianship from afar, watching Emma Thompson grow through the clinical distance of academic reports and occasional newspaper mentions, never once revealing his identity or seeking acknowledgement for his actions. 10 years after the rainy night that connected their lives, Emma Thompson stood before the imposing glass headquarters of Warren Enterprises, clutching her portfolio. At 29, she had transformed from the rain-soaked orphan into a poised young woman with 2 degrees in business and environmental engineering. Remember to breathe? Her roommate Olivia had advised that morning that they'd be lucky to have you. Emma smoothed down her carefully selected navy suit, her single professional splurge after graduation, and entered the building. The receptionist directed her to the 32nd floor for the interview. Ms. Thompson, sleek woman with impeccable posture, approached. I'm Naomi Jenkins, head of talent acquisition. Thank you for coming in today. Emma followed Naomi to a conference room where 4 executives waited. The interview proceeded with standard questions about her qualifications and experience, developing sustainable business models, her specialty, and the reason she'd applied to Warren Enterprises, new environmental initiatives, division, your approach to the Riverside development case study is unconventional, noted one executive, reviewing her portfolio. Conventional approaches prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability, Emma replied confidently. My model demonstrates how integrating environmental considerations from the start creates greater shareholder value over time while building community goodwill. An approving murmur rippled through the room. As Emma elaborated on her ideas, she didn't notice the conference room door quietly opening. Richard Warren stood in the doorway, observing. He had intended merely to glance at the candidate Naomi had flagged as exceptional, potentially disruptive thinker, but found himself unable to leave. The confident young woman presenting complex financial models bore little resemblance to the small girl from his memories. Yet something in her determined expression and the way she stood her ground against questioning was hauntingly familiar. And what made you apply specifically to Warren Enterprises? Asked the final interviewer. Our environmental record hasn't always been stellar. Emma smiled. Precisely why I'm here. Companies with the resources to make significant change often need perspectives from outside their usual circles. And she hesitated briefly. There's something about Warren Enterprises that's always felt connected to my journey, though I can't explain why. Richard felt his chest tighten at her words. Before he could process his reaction, Naomi noticed him. Mr. Warren. We weren't expecting you, she said, causing the room to snap to attention. Emma turned. Meeting the gaze of the company's notorious founder, recognition flickered across her face, not of their shared past, but of the man whose business philosophy she had studied. Ms. Thompson is applying for the sustainability director position, Naomi explained. Richard approached slowly, extending his hand. Interesting presentation. You believe we can maintain growth while implementing these environmental frameworks? I don't believe it, Mr. Warren. I can prove it, Emma replied, her handshake firm. The data supports it conclusively. For a moment, Richard was transported back to that rainy night, the same unwavering confidence in those eyes, even when facing something much larger than herself. You're hired, he said abruptly. Sir, we have other candidates scheduled, one executive began. Cancel them? Richard interrupted. Ms. Thompson starts Monday. Sign her to lead the Riverfront project team. As Emma processed this unexpected turn, Richard turned to leave, pausing briefly at the door. Welcome to Warren Enterprises, Ms. Thompson. I believe you'll make quite an impact here. What Richard couldn't say was how profoundly strange it felt to finally be in the same room with the person whose life had silently paralleled his own for a decade. The child who had once saved him, now grown into a woman whose path had somehow led her directly back to him. 3 months into her position at Warren Enterprises, Emma had already made waves. Her innovative approach to the riverfront development had saved millions while gaining unprecedented community support. Though she rarely interacted directly with Richard Warren, she occasionally felt his watchful gaze during presentations. The CEO seems to have a special interest in your division, commented her colleague Jackson, after one executive meeting. He's probably making sure his gamble paid off, Emma replied. I wasn't exactly a conventional hire. One evening, working late, Emma headed to the executive floor to deliver revised projections for the morning meeting. The offices were deserted except for a light in Richard's corner suite. Approaching cautiously, she found his door ajar and him absorbed in documents. Mr. Warren, I have the riverfront numbers you requested. Richard looked up, momentarily startled. Come in, Miss Thompson. As Emma placed the folder on his desk, she noticed a familiar logo on an open file, Willowbrook Children's Home. You know Willowbrook? She asked. Surprised, Richard closed the file too quickly. A philanthropic interest. Something about his reaction triggered Emma's curiosity. That's where I grew up, she said, watching his expression carefully. Riverview Academy. A flicker of discomfort crossed Richard's face, so brief anyone else might have missed it. Riverview is an excellent school, he commented neutrally. It was especially for an orphan on scholarship, Emma replied, her suspicions growing. An anonymous scholarship that appeared mysteriously after I helped a man having a heart attack. One rainy night, the silence between them hummed with unspoken recognition. It was you, Emma finally said. On Maple Street 10 years ago, Richard stood abruptly, moving to the window. It's getting late, Ms. Thompson. We can discuss the projections tomorrow. Did you fund my education? She persisted. Was Willowbrook's mysterious benefactor you all along? Richard turned, his expression unreadable. Would it matter if it was? It would explain why my application was fast-tracked despite dozens of more qualified candidates, Emma said, her voice hardening. Why I was given project lead on my first week. Your qualifications are exceptional, Richard countered. I don't make business decisions based on sentiment. Emma laughed incredulously. So it's just coincidence that I ended up here. You happened to sit in on my interview. Naomi flagged your application, Richard said, but his usual commanding tone faltered. Emma moved closer. Studying the man she'd encountered twice now at pivotal moments in her life, was anything about my hiring genuine? Or am I just your charity? Project the poor orphan you're rewarding for a good deed. Richard's carefully constructed walls began crumbling. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then explain it to me, Emma challenged. Because right now it feels like my entire career, everything I've worked for, might be built on your guilt or pity. Neither, Richard snapped, finally meeting her gaze directly. It was built on your merit. I merely opened doors, you walked, through them on your own strength. He hesitated before adding quietly, "You always had that strength." Even at 9 years old, standing in the rain. The confirmation struck Emma like a physical blow. Her world tilted as pieces fell into place. The scholarship, the opportunities that had seemed like miraculous luck, all connected to this man who had shaped her life from the shadows. "Why keep it secret?" she asked, her voice barely audible. You have wanted to know?" Richard countered. "That your achievements came with invisible strings?" "There were strings?" "None," he said firmly. "Only ... observation." Emma stepped back, overwhelmed. "I need to process this." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Did you hire me because you thought you owed me something?" Richard Warren, who had built an empire through calculated control, found himself unable to give the simple denial that would end this uncomfortable confrontation. The truth was far more complex than either of them was prepared to face. "I hired you," he finally said, "because you were the most qualified person for the job. But I recognized your name because for 10 years I've carried the memory of a child who showed more humanity in 5 minutes than I had in my entire life." Emma nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, and left without another word, leaving Richard alone with the weight of a decade of secrets suddenly exposed to the light. For 2 weeks following their confrontation, Emma and Richard maintained a careful professional distance. The riverfront project continued moving forward, but their interactions were limited to necessary communications through Naomi.Emma, threw herself into work, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. Part of her felt betrayed, as though her achievements might be tainted by invisible assistance. Another part recognized the doors Richard had opened were ones she had walked through. Entirely on her own merit, Richard meanwhile found himself increasingly distracted. For 10 years, he had observed Emma's life from a clinical distance. Now having her in his company, seeing daily evidence of the remarkable woman she had become, stirred something he had long buried the capacity to care deeply about another person's journey. The stalemate broke unexpectedly during a crisis. The riverfront project faced sudden opposition from a developer with political connections, threatening years of work. "They're claiming environmental concerns, but it's just a blocking tactic," Naomi explained during an emergency meeting. "Want the property for their high-rise?" As the team debated responses, Emma quietly pulled data from her files. "I need 10 minutes with the projector," she said, interrupting the increasingly heated discussion. Richard, who had been silently observing, nodded. "Everyone give Ms. Thompson the floor." What followed was a masterclass in problem-solving. Emma presented a modification to their design that would create additional public green space while still maintaining profitability and would make any opposition appear obviously self-serving. "If we announce this adjusted plan tomorrow," she concluded, "we control the narrative and gain community support that no developer can overcome." The room fell silent, then burst into appreciative comments. As the team dispersed to implement her strategy, Richard remained. "Exceptional thinking," he said when they were alone. Emma gathered her materials. "It's my job." "No, Richard." Corrected gently, "Your job was to follow the existing plan. What you just did was transform a crisis into an opportunity. That's leadership." Emma finally met his gaze directly. "I've had 2 weeks to think about our conversation. I have questions." Richard nodded. "My office. 1 hour." When Emma arrived, she found Richard standing by the window, watching the city. Below on his desk sat a familiar manila folder. "Your file," he explained. "Every report, every achievement, from the day after you helped me until your university graduation." Emma approached cautiously, opening the folder to find years of her life documented through academic evaluations and newspaper clippings. "Why?" she asked simply. Richard turned from the window. "I told myself it was an investment, that identifying promising talent early was good business." A faint smile touched his lips. "But that was a lie I created to justify something I couldn't explain, which was." "You saved my life," Richard said quietly, "not just by calling the ambulance, but by showing me something I had forgotten. Existed genuine compassion, without expectation of return." Emma studied the man before her, not The ruthless businessman of reputation, but someone more complex. He never contacted me directly, never took credit. Would it have been genuine help if I had expected gratitude? Richard asked. You needed opportunities, not obligations. Emma considered this. Did you orchestrate my hiring here? No, Richard said firmly. Naomi flagged your application independently. When I saw your name, I merely ensured I would be present for your interview. Something in his honesty resonated with Emma. The night you had your heart attack, she said slowly. I was terrified, but I couldn't leave you alone. Something connected us.
Ow!
Richard moved closer. His usual commanding presence softened. For 10 years, I've carried the memory of that night. It changed something fundamental in me. Seeing the world through the eyes of a child who had so little, yet gave so freely, it altered my perspective in ways I'm still discovering. Emma smiled tentatively. So where does this leave us now? You're still my boss. Technically, you report to the board on the riverfront project, Richard corrected. But more importantly, we're two people whose lives intersected at crucial moments. What happens next is something we decide together with complete honesty. Honesty, Emma repeated. Right. I think I can work with that. In the weeks that followed, they began building something neither had anticipated, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared vision. Emma's innovative approaches complemented Richard's strategic experience, transforming Warren Enterprises, environmental initiatives beyond what either could have achieved alone. And on rainy evenings, they sometimes found themselves sharing coffee in Richard's office, talking not as CEO and employee, but as two souls connected by a moment of simple humanity on a rain-soaked sidewalk. Moment that had changed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. What Richard Warren discovered in the end was that the little girl who had once saved him had grown into a woman who would save him again, not from a physical crisis, but from the isolation of a life measured only in financial success. And Emma Thompson found that her greatest strength had always been her capacity for compassion, a quality that had not only shaped her own destiny, but had transformed the heart of a man who had once believed himself beyond such transformation. Together, they created something neither had fully experienced before, a future shaped not by obligation or gratitude, but by the rarest and most valuable currency of all, genuine connection.